All right, hey everybody, thanks for joining us this evening. We are using Google Meet here, so just to make sure that we don't have any feedback or noise going on during the meeting, if you could mute yourself. So you should see at the bottom of the screen, there's a little slider to mute your mic. So if you could do that, that'd be great. If you do have a question, there's a little hand icon at the bottom. You can click on that and we'll get a little alert that you have a question. And then we can stop and answer that, and then you can unmute and ask your question. So I think we'll get started. So welcome everybody. We're really excited to give you a quick update on the Watershed Action Plan for Lake St. Catherine, and also show you some projects that have been selected out of some of the projects that have been created in the program, and then we'll pick 3 of those tonight to advance to the design stage. So that'll be at the end of the presentation. So what we'll do is we'll get started to give you a quick update on the work that's been done by just tons of folks doing a lot of great work around the lake. So we're excited to tell you about it. So some of the folks that we have here tonight, we have Hillary from Pulteney Meadowy, we have and Sadie. We have Evan from Evan Fitzgerald, limnologist Emily Porter-Goff is here. Andy from Castleton University, Vermont State University is here. And I'm Jeremy Jones from the Lake St. Catherine Association. And we've got some DEC folks here too. Hello, DEC folks, thanks for coming. So what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to tell you just really briefly for those who aren't aware what a Watershed Action Plan is. We'll talk about some of the programs that we're already doing, some that we hope to do or will be doing. And then we'll give you an update on lots of current conditions around the lake that were found during this almost 3-year study now of the lake in lots of different areas around the lake. So shorelines, roads and culverts, streams, wetlands, forest blocks. Then we'll show you some projects that have been selected, and we'll pick our top 3 to move on to the design stage. And then we can also answer questions as they come in and at the end as well. So what is a LWAP, Watershed Action Plan? So a Watershed Action Plan is designed to identify and communicate the problems and fixes within a lake watershed to best protect water quality, wildlife habitat, and the lake's ecosystem health. These plans answer the questions, what issues threaten the health of the lake the most, and what can we do about them? So on that image on the right, you can see the lake, and you can see the orange outline shows you what the full lake watershed looks like. So that's inside that orange line is the entire Lake St. Catherine watershed. Then you can see the little yellow areas up at the north and the south, and then also which would go east from the big lake into the orange area there. Those are the sub watersheds for Lily Pond, the big lake, and the little lake. So I mentioned this previously, but these are some of the things that were studied over the last 3 years. The roads, the wetlands, the forests, what's going on in lake, what's coming into the lake from streams and tributaries, and what our current land use is around the lake. And we also want to mention our funders, Lake Champlain Basin Program and the New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission. We applied for a grant back in 2021 for this project, and we're very happy to be partnering with Lake Champlain Basin Program on our Lake Watershed Action Plan. So we're going to start off by talking about some of the programs and projects that we were working on and with our partners pre Lake Watershed Action Plan. So those included our VIP program, which was fairly new, where we patrol around the boat launch area in Wells and also near the state park. and we look for introductions of potential new invasives there. So we've had 4 paddles so far, and we're hoping to expand those to do more of them and expand the areas that we're checking for new invasives that could have been introduced into the lake. So this is kind of an early warning system, looking for new invasives that could be impacting the lake. Then we've had the Greeter program, which is at the boat launch in Wells, and that's been running for since 2004. That program that we fund checks for boats that are entering the lake and boats exiting the lake for invasive species. So we make sure that none are coming in and none are going out of the lake. Then we've got our milfoil control program. These are all part of our aquatic invasive species AIS prevention and control programs that we're running. So our milfoil control program, we've got 5 components, which consists of education, volunteer cleanup, a diver-assisted suction harvesting dash team, spot treatments of herbicide, and water quality improvement projects, which we'll talk about here in upcoming slides. So then we've got the water quality improvement programs that we're partnering with lots of great folks like Hillary's team. So we've got the Lake Education and Action Program, and that works with student interns to provide native buffer plantings around the lake. They do invasive species removals and provide education to shoreline property owners. That's a great program that Hillary's been running for many years. Then back in 2019, the Lake Wise on Lake St. Catherine program started up. So this is working with property owners to make sure that their property is lake friendly. So runoff isn't running off from their property, taking care of stormwater that happens on their property. And over 100 properties have already been assessed on the lake, leading to 29 Lakewise awards and lots of plantings and improvements, even on properties that haven't reached the criteria to get the award. But those properties are still working on those. And we're looking to expand this to other property owners. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. It's a free program. And we also partner with the Lake Champlain Basin program on that. And they've been able to fund us through grants for the past several years. Then there's the Stormwater Master Plan. Hillary, Polymetawees, and Evan Fitzgerald's team have identified 50 areas around the lake for potential phosphorus reduction projects. 6 of those projects have been implemented. And back in 2023, we received a grant to design 10 more. And we had a meeting about that in September of 2023. And currently 10 of those projects were picked at that meeting, and Evan's team is currently working on designs for those. Once those are designed, we'll then reach out to groups for grant funding to implement those projects. And then testing and monitoring. We've been participating in the lay monitoring program for over 40 years on the lake, and that takes biweekly water samples and sends them off to Vermont for testing. The state of Vermont has a great website where you can see all the lay monitoring data for our lake and any other lake in Vermont that's participating in the program. And Hillary and Andy from Castleton have been monitoring streams and tributaries in the lake for several years. And we'll talk about that a little bit more coming up. And that's a picture of Mark Mitchell, who's the head of the lay monitoring program. And then we do education and outreach. So we've got the Libraries Love Lakes program, which I hope you've heard about, where we do educational events about stewardship around the lake. One of the things that was created this year that we are looking forward to unveil soon is this watershed model. And I think I saw Nick here. Nick did a fantastic job creating this watershed model of Lake St. Catherine. It'll hold water, and we can do show a lot of things on this because it can hold the water, and we can show erosion, we can show runoff and things like that on the model. And it's it's beautiful to look at, besides being an educational tool. So current, let's talk about current in-lake conditions. So these are other programs that have been happening since the LWAP was started. So we've already mentioned tributaries and water quality monitoring, but what's happened with those is we've increased, or Hillary and Andy have increased the number of streams and tributaries that we're looking at. So the number of stations have been increased. And that's a cool picture on the right there. You can see all the tributaries that lead into the lake. We've been told that this program called the Next Generation Lake Assessment is currently occurring at the lake. Some testing has already been done. We haven't had the data come through yet. We're hoping to see that soon. But an NGLA was conducted on Little Lake in 2016. And you can see all the data from that on the state's website as well. But these are the things that they test. Lots of different parameters on a multi-day testing around the lake. So we're looking forward to seeing those test results when they come through. And then we took a sediment core this year, and I'm going to turn it over to Emily Porter-Goff, who's our limnologist on the Lake Watershed Action Plan for Lake St. Catherine. She'll talk about this sediment test that we took in August.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
All right. So I had suggested to the Lake St. Catherine Association to consider taking some sediment cores from the deepest part of the lake, because sediment cores, in addition to having sediment, also contain the cell wall of an organism called a diatom, which is a type of algae. And their cell walls are made out of silica, so essentially glass. It's the same as diatomaceous earth is made from, or basically is these cell walls of these organisms. And so they get preserved in the sediment core for hundreds and hundreds of years. So if we can figure out how old sediment is and identify the diatoms that were found there at that time, then we can reconstruct what the water conditions would have been like at that time. And to date the sediment core, you need to use radiocarbon dating to figure out exactly how old that sediment is. So we were able to remove a core that was it 36 centimeters deep, I believe, something like that. And we subsampled it and sent it off. So some was sent off to be radiocarbon dating, and then the other portion was used to identify the diatoms that were in the top layer, so the most recent layer of sedimentation, and then the oldest one that we were able to access. If you go to the next slide. Oh, and the reason why we wanted to do that was because if you're hoping to restore a lake to a healthier condition, then we really need to understand what it looked like at its healthiest. Each lake is different. So some lakes naturally just have more nutrients in them than others. So it's really hard to set like a goal nutrient level. So specifically phosphorus in this case, if we don't know historically before humans came in and started cutting down trees and paving roads, how much phosphorus that lake naturally had, which was why we decided to go this route of taking a sediment core. So we have back the data about the diatoms. We have not gotten back the radiocarbon dating results yet. So basically we know what was there now and what was there historically, but we don't have a year for that historic slice of sediment core yet. It should come in any day now. So what we saw was when they plugged in the different populations of diatoms into their model, they found that it did a really good job of reconstructing phosphorus conditions, because the model says, so if you look at table 1, Lake St. Catherine top, so that's the most recent sediment layer, using the model based on what diatoms were present and in what numbers, it gave us an estimated phosphorus concentration of 12 micrograms per liter, and your actual concentration average is about 13. So we know that that model is working really well. So using that same model with the bottom, the oldest sediment that we were able to sample, it estimates that phosphorus concentrations must have been around 6 micrograms per liter. So it means that we've approximately doubled the amount of phosphorus in the lake since whenever this oldest slice was from. So ideally it's pre-colonial, but with Vermont's lakes, it's really hard. In the coring device we had access to, it might have been really difficult to get a core deep enough to go pre-colonial, but we'll know that soon. So that was all good news. The disappointing part was we discovered that there is an invasive diatom in the lake, which constituted about 60% of all diatoms found in the most recent layer of the core. It made up over 80% of the 600 little shells that they counted. And so that kind of washes out being able to run many more indices on that top layer, because there was very poor diversity in the most recent diatom conditions, which is why the Lake Diatom Condition Index rates it as poor. It's not saying that your lake is in poor condition. It's saying that the diatoms poorly reflect the conditions of the lake because there's no diversity thanks to that invasive diatom. The invasive diatom is not toxic. It's in general not harmful, but it is greatly reducing diversity of the primary producers. So the algae is kind of like hay and leaves in terms of the food chain in the lake. So like, you know, the bunnies and the moose and all of the herbivores eat the hay and the grass. So there are all sorts of bugs and fish that depend on the algae for their food source. And diatoms produce fatty acid, long chain fatty acids, where we get a lot of these various, the micronutrients, that's the word I want in nutrition. So if we're getting rid of diversity of the diatoms that are available, we might start to see that reflected a little bit in the invertebrates that are found, and it might carry on up the food chain. But in general, humans won't see too much effect of this diatom. It just means it's much more difficult to use diatom indices to judge the current condition of the lake.
So Emily, so you would explain, just to expand a little bit on the lack of diversity. So with this diatom taking over, it could affect the organisms that were eating the diatoms,
right?
Which would then affect the next layer of the food chain, where there's lots of what those organisms would eat, so it could have a detrimental effect.
Potentially, yes. Yeah.
Okay. So when we get more information about the dating, we will definitely let folks know about that when that comes in. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah.
So Emily also recommended some testing equipment. So we've applied for a grant from the Lake Champlain Basin Program. We're awaiting word on this grant. So Emily had recommended the in-lake loggers, which is the first picture that you see. Those would stay in the lake in all three basins. So we would get one that would study or would record dissolved oxygen, and then three, one in each basin, that would collect conductivity data, and that would let us know what the salt stress is in the lake. Then we've got that handheld unit that you can see on the right. That one we'd be able to take readings wherever we want and whenever we want. So we would target certain areas, and also during certain conditions, like after storms, we would be able to use this device and do some testing. And I mentioned that the loggers would be in all three basins. And also part of the grant, Emily had mentioned macroinvertebrates. So we've got some equipment in the grant so that we can start studying the macroinvertebrates at our tributaries. And so if we get this grant, we'll be working with Emily to set up a system around the lake for all this equipment, and do some testing for and learn how to do testing for macroinvertebrates around the lake. And we got somebody trying to come in here. Let me add them in. Okay. All right. So the next section we're going to talk about is current shoreline conditions. I think Sadie's going to take this one.
Yes. So now we're moving just out of the lake and right onto the shoreline. So this is a pretty important one because of the level of development on St. Catherine. And we looked at the shoreline both as kind of an overhead view, looking at land uses, and then also at a more detailed level as we actually went around the lake. So for land uses, our more intact natural areas, so our forested buffers, our shoreline wetlands, and our parks account for approximately 2.85 miles of the shoreline. So that's about 18% of the lake shore is more this natural area. And then that means the rest is comprised of some sort of level of development, whether it's like a singular house or a more residential neighborhood setting with multiple layers of houses. So part of this task involved taking a shoreline boat tour to identify projects and areas to focus on. So on this map, the red dots represent more distinct shoreline projects that came out of this process. And then the black and white lines indicate areas that were identified as being more densely developed that would benefit from shoreline buffers and maybe be a focus area for future lake-wise assessments. Next. So these are examples of some of the more focus areas that we identified. As you can see, these are groups of properties that are pretty much lawn to lake, so they really don't have much vegetation on the shoreline. And having a vegetated shoreline is really important for water quality and many other reasons. So it can help slow water down, help infiltrate stormwater. It also helps to protect the shoreline from erosive forces, so like waves or ice. And then it has lots of other co-benefits, so it provides habitat for wildlife in the water and lake edge. So many important reasons that we're looking at these buffers right on the shoreline. And I believe these pictures are of Kinnickinnick and Idlewild. So those were a couple of the places that we called out as needing additional outreach happening there. And then these are some other examples of more distinct project areas that we'd be looking at. So that there's a picture of kind of active erosion happening that was taken on a section of Route 30. So with that, sediment carries excess nutrients into the water. So a project might be to restore that bank there. And then the other picture is another example of what some things we're looking for. There's multiple sources of stormwater runoff on that area, which causes erosion on the shoreline and produces these sediment plumes. And this is a good example of green space or an area that maybe a feature to treat water could go on. So we're looking for that in connection with where the problems are as well.
right, thanks, Sadie. So the next section is some roads and culverts. I think, is this Hillary?
Yep, this is me.
Okay.
Hey, everyone. So we looked at roads and culverts in a couple of different ways. The first thing that we really focused on were sections of the road that are hydrologically connected, meaning that sections of the road network drain directly to surface waters. And we looked at roads throughout the entire watershed to Lake St. Catharines. So that included Endless Brook Road, Sawmill Hill Road, and then, of course, the more obvious ones right around the lake, like Route 30 and Westlake Road. We met with the town road crews multiple times. We started out with an early meeting with them, reviewing all of those locations. The locations on that map that are red, those little red road segments, are ones that at that time were hydrologically connected and also did not meet the current road standards. And then the yellow ones partially met. So we met with Pulteney about some drainage issues along Ferncliff Road, and then the town of Wells up, Sawmill Hill and Endless Brook Road that you see sort of toward the top of the map there. And they had been going pretty actively addressing those segments, and you can see the call outs there. You can't read them, but you can see where those call outs are that have larger sort of amounts of text in them. And those are the reports back to us about the work that was happening on each of those road segments. And then toward the end of the process, so just this fall, we met with the Dave, with the Wells Town, the road foreman, and one of the Wells Select Board members, our staff, Evan, and also the Rutland Regional Planning Commission's transportation staff. And we went back out to all of these different areas. Dave and Paul with the town of Wells gave us updates as to sort of where those different roads were, as the work gets done and we get thunderstorms, plowing in the winter, the road conditions continue to change and evolve. So we went through the work that had been recently done and talked about their plans for future work, but they seem to be very actively engaged in all of this work, and very much feel connected to the water quality in the lake. And in fact, Dave talked about ways that he's actually also trying to reduce salt inputs, especially in the roads that are around the lake. And then the drainage issues on Ferncliff Road are kind of ongoing. We were out with the town of Pulteney road crew multiple times over the summer. They've been working to try and improve drainage out there. And then with our other grant, that sort of the stormwater master plan work, there'll be an update on, there's a scoping study that's taking place there, and also on Channel Drive, looking at those drainage areas a little more holistically. So those updates will be in a subsequent meeting. But we were very actively sort of working with the town and them with us throughout this process, which was really nice. And then the next slide. So one of the other things we did is we looked at all of the cross culverts that drain directly into the lake. So the purple dots are basically any culvert that passes under a road that surrounds the lake. It could have a stream affiliated with it, or it could just be road drainage that needs to get across the road so it doesn't back up. So each of those little orange lines are basically the watershed of those cross culverts. So we looked at each of those cross culverts and we tried to determine if there was enough space there to put some type of an infiltration project where we might be able to clean that water before it went to the lake and slow it down a little bit. So we have a couple pictures of sort of what that might look like on the next slide, but we found 12 opportunities around the lake where we can approach landowners, ask if they'd be interested in a project, and we might be able to do some good sort of cleanup of the water that's just mostly collecting in the roadside ditches and then running to the lake. Try and slow it down and clean it before it gets to the lake so we can take some of those nutrients and sediment out and just send that as clean groundwater to the lake. So these are some examples. The picture on the right is a rain garden that we've already planted, and just to give you a sense of what it could look like. I think obviously like messiness is a factor that people may be concerned about when they're adding plantings to their property, and it doesn't have to look this way. But I love the colors in that rain garden, the purples and kind of lime greens. So this has been this garden in terms of the health of the plants and the way that they've grown and the way that they're slowing water down. To me, it seems very successful. The picture on the left is an area where a culvert comes out, and that's just below this space. And if the landowner was interested, and we haven't approached them, but if the landowner was interested, we could do some similar kind of a garden in this space as well. But those are the types, that's how it might look for these sort of 12 different locations around the lake if people are interested in working with us.
Okay, and then next we're going to, thank you, Hillary. Next we'll talk about watershed conditions.
Passing it back to Sadie.
Yeah, so some of this has already been briefly touched on by Jeremy, but as part of the LWAP, we were looking more closely at our monitoring on our tributaries to St. Catherine. Endless Brook has been sampled for a number of years, and then we added additional tributaries in 2019, and then other sites were identified as well. The map shows the watersheds of these different sampling locations, which you can see does cover quite a bit of the larger lake watershed. So the sample locations are a variety of input and stream types. Some are more within wetlands, like 01, 02, and 05, and then some are more of your traditional looking stream channels, like those on Endless Brook and at 03. One of the interesting things about inputs to St. Catherine is most of them actually dry up partway through the summer, which can make sampling a challenge sometimes with the program that we use. And then it also speaks to the timing of that nutrient input into the lake. For phosphorus, we were seeing that the sites associated with wetlands tended to have higher levels of nutrient during low flow events versus high flow events, which kind of follows what we know about attenuation and nutrient cycling in these more productive wetland type environments. Another thing to note about some of the sampling is that the consistently high phosphorus level in 03, which is that teal colored one, and that runs along Capron Lane. And this area also drains as it goes through the wetlands in the channel. It's also where we had seen some algae blooms as well occurring there. So potentially some of that nutrient could be impacting that. And then I think with that, I will let Andy talk a bit more about their involvement and more on Endless Brook.
Thanks, Sadie. Yeah, Andy Vermillier at Vermont State University, Castleton. So yeah, we've been excited to partner with Poultney Meadowy and the Lake Association on focusing mainly on Endless Brook, since it is the largest tributary into the lake. So you saw on the map, the big kind of yellow tan blob, that's about 44% of the watershed is just Endless Brook coming in. So what we did at the start, or just prior to the LWAP, you can see in the image on the left, we installed a stream gauge. So basically in that PVC pipe, this is right under Route 30, kind of by the state park there. There's a pressure transducer, and we can continuously monitor stream height. And then me and my students go out there. You can see my student Chris here on the right-hand side. He's actually measuring stream flow, and so he can calculate discharge at any moment. So that's the volume of water per time that's moving through. So we can correlate those things, and with a stream gauge like this, we can get a continuous monitor or record of water discharge from Endless Brook. So that's what we've been working on, and this in collaboration with all of the concentration data that Poultney Meadowy has been collecting for total phosphorus. It allows us to figure out how much phosphorus is actually being exported into the lake from Endless Brook on a day, on a season, on a year. And now hopefully we've been doing this for a couple of years, year after year, we can see how the export of phosphorus changes in Endless Brook from year to year. So Jeremy, I think just one more there. So, we can, this graph on the left look, there's nothing really to look at, but this is the kind of record that we can develop where it's showing that discharge, that volume of water from Endless Brook per time on the up and down axis versus time. And you can see storm events coming through, you can see seasonal differences, and then you can see especially that summer of 22 when it was dry for like 2 months, it seemed like, Endless Brook. I guess I'll just wrap up here by saying the pictures in the middle actually show right at the stream gauge at similar stages or similar water flows. And it's kind of hard to see, but on the top picture, the water is almost clear. And on the bottom, it's just full of sediment. The phosphorus level is higher. And so the dynamics of the water quality, it changes drastically. And it's not just connected to the water flow in a storm event. So there are other factors like probably slumping banks and things like that that are kind of a little bit more sporadic that control the water quality in Endless Brook. So hopefully in the future, we can start to look at some more storm events and put all the concentration data together with this, with the stream gauge that we've installed there to learn more about how the water quality changes with high and low flows and things like that. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. So now we're on streams. I think Evan's gonna jump in on this one.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Evan Fitzgerald. So we did a series of stream walks in the watershed on the larger streams, like Endless Brook that Andy just spoke about. And the idea is to do what we call a geomorphic assessment. We're not following the full protocol that the state lays out that's very in-depth, but rather a geomorphic assessment light is what we call it, where we walk the stream, we observe areas of erosion like you see in this photograph, try to get a sense of kind of the relative load of sediment and phosphorus that might be coming from the banks and the beds of streams. So this, what you see on the slide here, is a table of some of the data that comes out of these assessments. We take measurements of the geometry of the channel, relate that to what we'd expect for the geometry of a stable channel in a similar size stream. Look at the substrate of the stream. Is it sandy, gravelly, cobbly? What does that say about the stability of the channel, etc.? Go ahead to the next. And actually, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, Sadie, it was you and Hillary that walked these streams. If you wouldn't mind popping in here to talk about these.
Yeah. Yeah, so we completed 2 other stream walks in addition to the one at Endless Brook. And we had chosen these ones based on that monitoring data. So these were 2 of the higher sites for phosphorus. So the stream along Bullfrog Hollow is a channel that kind of varies in width and runs like through the wetland complex there. So it looks really healthy. There's a lot of vegetation surrounding it, and we didn't really see anything of concern there. And then the other stream that was associated with the high nutrient loads is the one that runs along Capron Lane. And that overall, it's in pretty good condition. So the smaller, lower portion is channelized and without a buffer, but the majority of it has a lot of woody debris and good access to its floodplain. We did note a couple locations where the stream is constricted, and then a likely nutrient source toward the top of the drainage as well. It kind of summarizes those 2 stream walks. So from this overall combined work, we found 5 projects in the stream sector. So those callouts list the reaches. So from that table that Evan was talking about, that information is from there, and then those projects that we identified through this work as well. So this is an example of some of the things that we're looking for. There is small gravel kind of throughout the stream network, which may speak to the transport of some of the eroded material and the stability of the stream bed. And then you can see the incision the erosion there on the bank, kind of lowering the stream elevation, which erodes the banks, increasing sediment load, and also disconnects the river from its floodplain. So looking for ways to alleviate some of those issues.
All right. So one of the other things that we really wanted to look at in the greater watershed was where the wetlands occurred, and then what percentage of the upland areas drained through wetlands before that water reached the lake. And the idea being that wetlands often they absorb nutrients. They may sometimes release nutrients because they're sort of high nutrient systems. So in low water conditions, they might release some nutrients, but they tend during high water conditions and storms to be very good at slowing and capturing stormwater and sinking nutrients. So we looked at the 10 largest wetlands. Evan and his group mapped the areas draining to those wetlands. And we worked with the State of Vermont Wetlands Program and also some of Evan's wetlands staff. And Sadie and I were trained in how to fill out there's a wetlands function assessment. So we filled out the wetlands function assessment for each of these watersheds and, recorded that data with photos and maps of where these these sub-watersheds to these wetlands are located. You can tell that every time we pick a point within this greater watershed that we want to study or look at, we're kind of thinking in terms of what area in this watershed drains to this point. So there's a lot of breaking up this watershed, whether it's looking at what drains to these cross culverts, what drains to the water quality monitoring locations, or what drains to a wetland. We were breaking up the watershed into smaller units based on sort of what's draining to one single location that we're focused on at that time. So we visited all of these wetlands, and I think next slide. These we ended up writing up, so we have a lot of photos and took a lot of information, and we ended up filling out a sheet. This is one sheet kind of broken in two to fit on the slide, but if you put those pieces back together, we filled out one of these field sheets for each wetland, and this is basically a summary of the wetland function survey, which is about a 10-page survey that looks at a lot of data pretty in depth. So it's looking at remote sensing data, like GIS data that we're getting from the state of Vermont in terms of endangered and threatened species and soil types, infiltration rates, and then looking at things that we're seeing when we're on the ground, like what type of plants are there? Are there invasive species? Is there standing water? What is the sort of relationship between the upland area and the wetland itself? So all that gets summarized on this field sheet, and then we were looking for trends. We were very impressed with all of these watersheds, or all of these wetlands. And I think that we realized later we had picked the largest wetlands. We had, this was our first time sort of doing this and incorporating it into a watershed action plan. So we sort of discussed it and figured out where we wanted to start. In retrospect, we may have also included some of the smaller wetlands. I think those are the wetlands that get overlooked a little bit more. They're less obvious. They might be all on a single private property. And so we may have looked at those a little bit more as well and tried to characterize the value of those on the landscape. But in terms of the wetlands we did look at, we were very impressed with their health. We did have a number of projects that came out of this survey as well. And one example of that type of project was a wetland buffer that was almost entirely filled with ash trees. Ash trees are declining right now, and the ash in this buffer were sick and dying. And so there was a whole significant area of one of our wetlands that was going to not have any trees in it anymore. So so we noted that type of occurrence, as well as things we were seeing in the wetland itself. So we can reach out to that property owner and maybe talk about a tree planting, or just keep an eye on that type of change that's happening right now. Next. So these are examples of two of the wetlands we looked at. These are very different wetlands. The photo on the left is actually from the Lucidian wetland complex, and we didn't have access to most of this. This was one of the two wetlands that we didn't have full access to because we didn't have landowner permission, but we had access to part of it. So this is Millbrook, and you can see how, so do you remember in the last picture of a stream where we talked about how the stream bed elevation was dropping and that stream no longer had access to its floodplain? This picture on the left is a great example of a stream that has full access to its floodplain. The floodplain almost comes right into the stream. So that was a beautiful example of a wetland and a stream very closely connected, and sort of interacting together with that wetland, able to buffer that stream and absorb overflow and flood water from that stream. And then the photo on the right is, I think it's the largest wetland that we looked at. It's in the channel. It's on the eastern side. It extends up the hill and it extends out into the water. And we accessed it from both the land. Thank you to the landowners who let us tromp around in their wetland, and also then kayaked in from the lake. And just really a dynamic, interesting wetland. Okay, so we also looked at, we were trying to look at the forested part of the watershed as well. And we looked at the water, we looked at the whole watershed for Lake St. Catherine, and it's, there's a map layer that's called natural communities. And it basically grades what we're calling forest blocks, sort of contiguous areas of forest, as to the richness of the natural communities in that contiguous forest area. So this, you can see the blue outlines on that map. Those are the properties that we had permission to walk on. So we met with landowners, walked on their property, got a sense of that historic land use through some of the old, some like Google Earth through time, and conversations with landowners. And then there's a map of that forest block on the right with the blue sort of turquoise outline. And you'll notice it's got these sort of purple blobs through the center of it. So those are natural communities that are kind of special natural communities, rare natural communities, or natural communities that have some kind of interesting value. So we had a lot of those along the top of that ridge line that overlooks Lake St. Catherine. And they included, there were some like oak hickory natural communities that are very open with sedgy understories that are actually rare. And they're rare, but they're a little bit more common in this area. So we actually saw some of that on all of the properties that we looked at in the higher elevations. The other thing they had was a very high, there were hemlock stands or hemlock dominated stands on some of these hillsides, which were beautiful to look at. Hemlock's an evergreen, a beautiful tree. There are threats to hemlock. And so we noticed that there were single stands, just hemlock by itself, growing on some very steep parts of the watershed. There are threats to hemlock. And so we were taking notice of both where the properties we were walking on were very stable and resilient, and there was a lot of bedrock. Their streams were relatively stable. Their logging roads were in good shape. For the most part, the land use was becoming less intensive over time. So where it might have been farmed and logged fairly heavily in the past, now most of it was growing back, and folks were tending to use their property more for recreation. So a lot of stability in this area, and then these interesting special communities. And then also some kind of interesting areas that were steep with single stands, of hemlock, single species stands of hemlock, which, if they get sick and die, could leave an exposed steep area on the hillside. So just looking at both the threats and also some really positive, stable aspects of these properties, and really appreciate the landowners who let us walk around on their property and take notice of everything. So these are just some quick example pictures. That's on the left is beech bark disease. It's pretty common. There were some studies done by Green Mountain College up on the Dean Preserve. And those trees are pretty sick now. So this is something that's progressing in our area, unfortunately. There's a tributary from one of the properties. You can see actually how stable it is. It's got a lot of bedrock. So you see a piece of wood crossing it, and behind that, there's quite a bit of bedrock. A nice, stable little tributary, which is great. And then this is that sedgy, like oak, hop hornbeam, hickory special community that grows along the top of this ridge. That's just really beautiful.
Great. Okay, so that's kind of a quick update on the LWAP from all kinds of different areas around the lake, which was super interesting. Thank you, everybody, for all that information. So now we're going to talk about the potential projects. But before we do that, did anybody have any questions on what they've heard so far? If you do, hit the little hand raise and we'll call on you. And if not, we can wait until the end. Okay. Yeah, so we'll move on to the potential projects, and we'll turn it over to Evan.
All right. So what we're hoping to do, Jeremy mentioned this at the beginning of the meeting. We started with a long list of projects. I think we had 50 projects total across all of those different assessments that you just heard about: the streams, the wetlands, the roads, the culverts, the forested areas. Each of those assessments resulted in, say 5 to 10 projects in each of those kind of areas of the watershed. We've done some initial work as a team, as an LWAP team, to kind of winnow that list down based on the merits of the project. So we started with 50. Most of those projects lend themselves to evaluating how much phosphorus, for example, the project recommended project would mitigate or sort of slow the flow to the lake through that intervention. Some of the projects were more general, kind of programmatic recommendations that didn't lend themselves to that kind of prioritization. But what we've done is boiled that list down into a list of 8 projects. And I should say, I think the first one up here, I know the owner, one of the owners of the properties here, and please don't take, if you see your property on this list, certainly don't take it as an indictment or anything of your property, rather, an opportunity to work with us to improve probably some of the maintenance issues that you're seeing on the land, and of course improve water quality in the lake. So I know many of you we've spoken with already, but if you're surprised to see your property on here, hopefully you see that as an opportunity like we do. So I'm not sure if it's a reasonable goal to actually get input from everybody and select the 3 projects that we want to select in this meeting. That's ultimately where we have to land. We have limited funding in this scope to pick basically 3 projects to move to conceptual design. We're starting with a list of a narrowed down list of 8 here. So whether we pick 3 tonight or not, we're looking to get everybody's feedback tonight, and then follow up, emails and what have you, if that's more appropriate. So, okay, with that opening. The first one we've got here is Locklear Lane. This site is actually a little different from a site that we focused on in the Stormwater Master Plan, which is a little bit north of here. By the way, all the maps I'm going to show you are oriented such that north is to the left. So you see the little north arrow there in the lower left-hand corner of the map. Locklear Lane has a big drainage area upslope. You can see the contours on this plan, and just a lot of runoff comes off that steep hill and then comes through Locklear Lane and some private drives and picks up a lot of erosion and sediment as it comes down through. So here we're looking to put a small stormwater basin kind of down, if you look at that lower left-hand picture, down where the road sort of meets a ditch before it goes under a culvert directly to the lake. So this would be a stormwater intervention to filter and slow down stormwater before it hits the lake. Okay, next. We mentioned the stream assessments. Through those assessments, we found some areas where, especially on Endless Brook, where the stream is really what we call incised. So historically, it's been channelized, probably in an agricultural setting. It's had, farmers in the past probably put a lot of riprap and stone on the banks, and that causes the water to flow faster and the channel to sort of dig in its bed and over time in size into the landscape. So this section of Endless Brook, right down Route 30, Andy was talking about his measuring equipment on the stream. This is right in that area, both upstream along Endless Brook Road and then downstream in the state park. The idea here would be to try to reconnect the brook to its floodplain by either doing a little bit of excavation in the floodplain and then renaturalizing the floodplain with some plantings, and or raising the bed of the channel in some areas strategically by adding wood. This whole stretch of stream doesn't have any wood in the stream because it's so in size. So, and we would probably be looking to do that upstream of the state highway bridge because wood could be a conflict, at that opening. Next. Another stream project in Wells, quite a ways up the hill on Lamb Hill Road. This is as you can see in the picture, it's a small culvert, too small for the stream. It's about a 3-foot diameter, older corrugated metal pipe on a stream that really has a bankful width of about 11 or 12 feet. So this area of Lamb Hill Road, the town has kind of been fighting for some time, a lot of erosion along the banks and around the inlet of this culvert. So making culverts bigger makes them much more compatible with stream processes, and some of the instability that we typically see around an undersized culvert is alleviated once you have a right-sized culvert in the stream. So this project would be a bit more expensive. It'd be working with the town to upsize this culvert to get in, for example, like a concrete box culvert or perhaps a bigger pipe that's embedded into the channel and allows for passage of aquatic organisms. Next. Okay, we're going to show you a series now of projects that are on the cross culverts, and I might, I'll touch on them first. And Sadie, please, since you and Hillary looked at these more, in more depth, if you want to chime in at all, please feel free to do that. This first one, there's actually a few along Westlake Road. You see, this is near Catherine Caper Lane, so it's kind of in the southwestern portion of the lake. And you can kind of tell from the photographs here, there's an undersized cross culvert. Often when we see these big scour pools below undersized culvert, it means there's erosion happening, and often not enough sediment is moving down through the system. It's getting hung up upstream of the undersized culvert, and so we see erosion on down. So this would be an opportunity to mitigate that, and perhaps add some features that would really slow the flow and capture some of that sediment. And it might involve, probably would involve, looking at the size of that culvert as well. I don't know, Sadie, if there's anything you want to add to that one. Whoop.
Yeah, so that had been identified through fieldwork, and then it also was one of the projects that was brought up as a concern from a lake resident, that drainage area. And then that culvert, that cross culvert, is one of the larger, has one of the larger watersheds for the cross culverts that we looked at.
Great. Next. Similar area, you can see we've just moved to the southeast a little bit. This is along Westlake Road, a series of ditches that come down and take runoff from both the road and some upslope areas. Again, you can kind of see, if you're used to reading contour maps, you see on the screen here, when you see those contour lines very close to one another, it means it's steep terrain. So that area to the west is draining down toward that that symbol RO3, and the photographs show the ditches and the pipes coming under the road. Sadie, feel free to chime in on this one as well, if you'd like.
Yeah, so the cross culvert outlet, it goes directly to the lake, and there's like a series of smaller culverts and kind of open areas going across a private property there. So potentially it could be working with some of those open areas to look at more intentional infiltration there.
Great. And another spot here along Westlake Road. Sadie, you looked at this more carefully. I'm going to defer to you on describing this one if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think this one was one of mine. Evan, you might have to mute while we're talking. There's a little feedback. So this was an example of a cross culvert with a very small drainage area. There was some erosion in the roadside ditch just above the culvert from water coming probably out of the hillside. It's also a steep area, but not a very big drainage area here, and actually kind of a small area on the other side of the road. But the idea being that it's kind of a small, simple project, probably not very expensive, and just maybe a nice, easy demonstration project in a pretty contained watershed draining to this area, and then a contained little space on the other side. So I think as we go through all these cross culvert projects, we're going to need landowner permission to work on these properties. So I think in the end, probably we will sort of organize these. These are our top three, but we'll sort of organize these in a list, reach out to these landowners, and actually see where we get permission to work. And that may help drive where we actually pick our cross culvert projects. But we wanted to show you examples of the different kind of scales and scopes of these projects, and give you some examples.
Okay. Channel Drive. Channel Drive has a lot of hydrology issues. We did a walk along the drive this past summer and met up with some of the landowners and heard about the many storms that have kind of battered this area in the past couple of years. And again, similar theme. There's a pretty big drainage area to the west, and it's pretty steep, and it sends a lot of water down, flowing perpendicular to Channel Drive, which is then picked up and kind of channelized in these ditches along the upslope side of the road. And then, of course, there are limited places, because there are homes on the east side of the road. There are limited places where that water can kind of sneak through and make it to the lake. And where it does, it's really concentrated and flowing really fast. So there are lots of opportunities along Channel Drive for improvements. If there's anyone on the call from the road, we're certainly aware of that. And in the stormwater master planning effort, actually, we're going to be taking, I think Hillary mentioned this earlier, kind of a more holistic look of the whole kind of neighborhood and watershed to come up with multiple additional projects. But for the LWAP, we kind of focused on one area where we had some conversations with an owner, and that's the one that's highlighted in these photographs. It's a ditch that, again, like I described, kind of collects a lot of upslope water and shoots through two homes and has a fair amount of erosion. So this would be, the ditch is armored today, but it's probably inadequately armored. It could have, it could also be improved with some steps and pools that would dissipate the energy when the flow is heavier, so that it's not kind of raging down this steep slope and eroding sediment and soil into the lake, as you can kind of see in that photograph there. Next. Finally, this was a project that a lot of folks on the Watershed Action Plan team had interest in, and owners in this area as well. This is culvert that takes a large drainage area by Butternut Hill Road and North Street, and kind of shoots it down through Forest House Lane directly into the lake. And by the time it gets down to Forest House Lane, it's pretty channelized and in long culverts in between houses. So there may not be a lot of obvious opportunity down at the outlet for intervention, but so that sort of leads us to thinking about what could we do upslope to slow the flow, before it gets down there. There is a big wetland complex, and beavers have been active in this area. That's an issue that we've been aware of and talking with some of the owners about. But this is a bit more of a watershed scale, more programmatic recommendation, not a specific site. So yeah, I think that's the full list, or the full short list that we came up with as a team after we prioritized. Any project, anyone who's interested in looking at the full list and seeing how we did the prioritization, if that hasn't been shared yet, we can certainly do that for you. And any project that doesn't make it onto the short list to move ahead with concept designs is certainly eligible later. So it's not like we're kicking those, aside and not giving them any attention. It's just that we have limited resources to move 3 toward conceptual design. Those would have like a better chance in the near term of being implemented, but the others, with due time and funding, could also be implemented.
So thanks, Evan. So as Hillary mentioned, so as Hillary mentioned, some of these projects will obviously be dependent on property owner participation. So as she suggested, it might be good to have a quick discussion if anybody likes any of these projects and would like to speak up for one of them. I'm going to take some notes on people's comments. And then what we'll do is then, as Hillary described, reconvene with the group, see what projects both meet with people's approval here and also with potential landowner participation. And then we can make that final determination on what those 3 projects are. So we'd definitely like to open it up to any comments. Does that sound good, Hillary? Yep. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
So does anybody have any comments? Yep, go ahead, Mark. Oh, you got to unmute.
Sorry. I'd like to take a look at what Hillary's recommending, or the team's top 3 recommendations are. There's one that is really close to me geographically. It's directly on a new property owner. I haven't met the new property owner. They're out of state, but any dovetailing to our property, I would think that we would definitely encourage that to happen. But I defer to Hillary's top 3.
Yeah, Mark, why don't we connect and we can go see if we can connect with that property owner. We're in a little bit of a lucky spot right now in that private roads. I think Locklear Lane is private. Is that correct?
It's private lane. Yep.
Okay. So that we can at this point, it's pretty easy to get funding for private roads right now. That hasn't always been the case. So happy to connect with you, review maybe with you and the neighbor to the north who we have also communicated with, sort of the suite of opportunities in there. There are actually a number of opportunities down in there. And then also see sort of what you're mentioning right now.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And Robin's got her hand up. Hey, Robin.
Hey, everybody. Robin Barley Wagner. I'm the president of the Lake St. Catherine Conservation Fund. And I guess I would defer to the resident experts helping us understand what top 3 projects are going to give us the best return on your investment in terms of the quality of the lake and what you can deliver. What are those quick wins? I don't have an opinion one way or the other. You guys are the experts. You're the subject matter experts.
Thanks, Robin. And what we'll do, what Evan described, is a spreadsheet that they made where all the projects were listed and they all received a grade or a ranking based on all kinds of criteria. So, so these were some of the ones that received the top marks, but we'll share that as well on our website so folks can see the other projects and then how these scored and how they were scored. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay,
I'm-
kind of
I'm kind of
quiet.
curious. Allison Marchione is here with the state lakes and ponds, and she is involved in every lake watershed action plan that happens across the state. She's kind of our quality control here, observing the meeting. But I guess Allison, I'd be interested to sort of hear if you had any just thoughts as we finish this process, given your experience across the state, and also sort of looking at the suite of projects, if there were any that you were excited about, if you're available to say a few words.
Well, I always like to see lakeshore projects done because it's my wheelhouse. And you guys do have a couple interesting looking sort of shoreland buffer plantings. But I also think you have a lot of, I think when I was looking at it, it might have been stream or like floodplain projects that were looking a little more promising than maybe the shoreland ones were, especially in terms of like phosphorus reduction. And also some of the culvert replacements and things like that. There's a lot of really good projects. I'm happy to like really look at the spreadsheet and give you like a real answer of like the ones that I think look most promising. But from my recollection and from looking at these tonight, yeah, some of those were looking good to me.
Cool. Thanks, Allison. Appreciate you your comments and your work for the Lakewise program as well, which we're happy to be participating in on the lake.
Happy to have you guys involved.
Thanks, Allison. It's great to see you here tonight. And I just wanted to give Angie Allen a shout out too. She's the tactical or the basin planner for our basin, which includes the Otter Creek watershed, the Poultney and Meadowy watersheds, and then some of the watersheds in Bennington County. And Angie also is, so she would be involved in the lake watershed action plans for her area, which is this local area. But Angie, thank you also for being here tonight. We really appreciate your time and know that you're busy, and glad that you're able to kind of keep a finger on the pulse in terms of these projects and how they're moving forward, and appreciate all that you do to help us out also.
All right. So any other questions or comments before we, oh, Robin, go ahead.
Sorry. So Jeremy, you had mentioned your grant work that the LSCA is doing for the DO sensors for the 3 basins. The Lake St. Catherine Conservation Fund actually deployed 2 DO sensors last season and have been collecting data for 2024. And we used a third party, Darren Freshwater Institute, to interpret that data and collect the data and give us an analysis of the data. You know, I'd like to talk with you guys about moving forward. There's no sense in us both having DO sensors in the same basin. So I think we should be partnering together to kind of help each other offset that cost. And that's something that I'd like to talk with you guys about.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, well, I'll follow up with you after the meeting.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Robin. Mary Jo has got her hand up. Hey, MJ. You're muted if you're talking.
Am I still muted?
Nope, there you go. We can hear you now.
Okay, thanks. I want to thank you guys for all the work that you've put into this. I know it's been a tremendous effort on the part of all of the workers and presenters and folks from DEC and everywhere. So these 8 projects that you laid out, I just had a couple of questions. I didn't do my homework very well. Is in the R-02 on Westlake near Catherine Capers. That seems like an area to me that would be a worthwhile fix. And I'm not sure of the exact location, but I know when the camp was in operation there years ago, that there were some problems coming off from the stables and stuff. And I don't know if that's the same area, but it seems to me that that would be a good place to do maybe some restoration or culvert culvert repair there. And then the other place, I think it'd be worthwhile to look at Channel Drive and doing a project down there, because I'm sure there's a lot of projects down there that could be done, because the amount of water that comes off that hill. And if one project could be done to start, it might be some inspiration to, to expand that as time goes on. Those were my top two in looking at this. I think they're all worthwhile projects, and I know that funding is moving forward is going to be maybe not quite as easy as it has been for a while. So I guess we need to keep that in mind as well. Anyway, those are kind of my only comments, but I thank you guys so much, and look forward to continuing this watershed process with y'all.
Yeah, and Mary J,
Thanks.
just a comment on the strategic piece of this. I think given the fact that funding might be a little more challenging, I know Lake Champlain Basin programs where we have this funding, they're completely federally funded, and some of their funding is frozen right now. So one of the things we were talking about is we have access to state dollars too. Those state dollars are highly dependent on the phosphorus reduction. So it may be that we take our highest, like the ones we think that will reduce the most phosphorus, and we actually shift them out of this project and this funding and shift them into the Clean Water Service Provider funding, which I also help to run with the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, because we could probably fund the design and implementation through that funding, and they accept quarterly applications. And then the ones that are kind of like team favorites, but maybe don't have the phosphorus reduction piece, maybe they're more habitat or related to the streams or wherever. I don't know yet. I haven't in terms of phosphorus reduction, but those ones we might keep here so we can continue with that development, and then kind of see kind of explore our other options for funding if this basin program funding is harder to get. So yes, thank you, Mary Jo. That is something we are thinking about as we try to strategize around projects that we pick.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, MJ. Any other questions before we wrap up? Got one last chance. All right. So I'd like to thank Hillary and Sadie and Evan and Andy and Emily for all their fantastic work on this project. We are very close to the end, which will be in mid 2025 is when the final plan will be complete. We'll have another meeting to unveil the final Lake Watershed Action Plan for Lake St. Catherine. So we'll let everybody know when that's going to take place, and we'll do an in-person meeting for that to unveil that plan. But as I said earlier, I just want to thank everybody for all their hard work on this. This is fantastic. I hope everybody can appreciate how much work has gone into this over the last 3 years. And we really thank everybody for their involvement, including all the landowners and everybody else who's been very interested in this project. You've all helped in your own way, from allowing us to come onto your land or to talk about the issues that you've noticed when certain things are happening, and sending us pictures or calling us over to come take a look at it when it's happening. It's been very helpful in this process. So just want to say thank you to everybody involved. It's a very exciting project. And thank you to the DEC for their guidance as well. So with that, if there are no more questions, we'll say thank you very much for joining us this evening. And we will post a recording of this meeting up. So if you want to let folks know about it later, you can, if they missed out. And we'll also post up that list of projects that were identified. So thank you, everybody, and have a good night. Thank you. See you, everybody.
Everyone, thanks for being here.